In describing narrative therapy, I'm first going to talk about blackout poetry. If you're not familiar with blackout poetry, it involves taking a piece of text and selecting certain words to keep, and the rest of the words you black out or cover over or artistically render in some other way. People get really, really creative with blackout poetry. Here's one that I made. It says, "See the divine, trust the faith, phases end, winds grow, follow that wisdom of love." So that's a fairly simple one where I just selected certain words to keep and blacked out the rest. I use blackout poetry sometimes to teach skills from DBT, like literally helping clients see between black and white, or sometimes using blackout poetry as a metaphor for teaching solution-oriented therapies. Here's another one I created. I got a little bit more artistic with this one, but it reads, "One journey from grace, summon fear, reach the barrier far past night to the bright horizon lights. Go no farther. Turn in toward fear. Stop and watch. Eyes shine again and light the way through to survive." So I started thinking about blackout poetry and narrative therapy, and I realized blackout poetry could be a wonderful tool or metaphor for teaching about narrative therapy. I had a shift in my brain, and realized we could use blackout poetry in reverse to teach about narrative therapy. First of all, narrative therapy is under the postmodern umbrella of approaches to therapy or models of therapy. And postmodern models really emphasize the role of language, not only our language as a result of what we think, but also language as shaping what we think and how we think as individuals and as a society, which we don't always think of it in that way. But client language is really key. It's at the center in postmodern models or approaches to therapy. So I thought perhaps I could explain narrative therapy in this way. It's as if your client comes to you with their story, and it's like they've handed you a completed blackout poem where the words highlighted tell the story of their problem. It's intense. It's a lament. But there are more words, whole sentences, even paragraphs underneath. They've been blacked out. Maybe those words will ring true in concert with the message of this poem. But what if some of the words or sentences or paragraphs bring a new perspective? What if those words provide a yes and, or bring layers of nuance? This poem reads, "Black is the problem. Identity is the problem. Is problem, problem, problem. A view of identity as failure. Harsh, black failure. Not okay. New times forgotten. Values erode away. Voices hold darkness. All who look in view the problem, the problem, the problem. Undercurrent of hope, forgotten." So in narrative therapy, if this is what your client presents you with, your job in this metaphor is to gently start to separate the completed poem from the rest of the text that's underneath. Those words exist within the text. The words of this poem do exist within the text, and yet there are more words around them, more sentences. it's not quite the whole story. So as you gently unearth the text underneath, new ideas can emerge. Perhaps exceptions to the message of the poem lie underneath the blacked out spaces. The poem in context might take on new significance. The context around it has its own stories to tell too. The goal of narrative therapy is not to peel away every last bit of cover, to reveal the client a fraud and their story a hoax. No, no. Instead, the process gently encourages awareness of what is there, known to the client, but perhaps presently obscured. This process empowers the client to experience change by drawing upon what is already theirs, what they already possess, what may be known but overshadowed. Narrative therapy is a postmodern approach, and because of that, a foundational principle is that meaning is socially constructed, and the locus of ultimate meaning lies within each person's experience of their world, and that can be affected by so many things, including their culture, their gender, their socioeconomic status, their level of education, all sorts of different elements, particular to each human being, affect how they create and construct meaning for themselves and as a part of their broader social location. So their families, the language they speak, the customs and the traditions of their culture. So, in narrative therapy, the client is the ultimate authority on what determines meaning in their story. And at the same time, a narrative therapist who is social justice oriented will help the client to take their experience in the broader context of dominant discourses, of elements of power, social injustices that may be at play in their story as it exists in the overall context of society. So from here, clients can re-author their stories and remember the forces, the identities, the characters that occupy places in their stories. The same text now reads, black is the problem, self is no problem, see with clarity, emerge in light. Personal success stories emerge, times to connect, values hold meaning and perspective of the protagonist identity. The possible outlook of hope, faith in best strengths. I really like narrative therapy and can see myself using narrative therapy quite a bit moving forward. I appreciate that it separates the person from the problem. And I also feel very strongly about how narrative therapy, as all therapies, should be practiced from a perspective that is oriented to social justice. So the one catch with postmodern therapies is this concept that there is no center and truth is so relative. There must be at some point a line where that ends and this notion of injustice being unacceptable should be a part of therapy so that the process of therapy does not further engender the principles of injustice that may have brought the client to therapy to begin with. So we don't want therapy to be reinforcing injustice for the client. That said, I love the potential in narrative therapy that allows clients to reassert their identities, to own and rewrite their stories. And all of that is done within the context of the client's outlook on life and sense of meaning.